Nsemmilkom. Ħanitkellmu fuq suġġett illi dan żgur jolqot il-ħafna kull min għandu xi ħsieb razzjonali fejn isaqsi ħafna mistoqsijiet fosthom aħna minn aħna, minn fejn ġejna. U dan is-suġġett huwa xejn ħlief ix-xjenza. X'inhi di x-xjenza? Ix-xjenza hija biċċodda li l-bniedem juża biex jitgħallem. Kellna metodi oħra, metodi ta' twemmin. Bħal pereżempju minn fejn ġejna aħna, x'inhu l-ħolqien. U sa propju dan l-aħħar 200 sena kien illi nħaraq kollox f'60. Ħanna naraw x'kienu dal-ħolqien f'60 f'dal-filmat li ġej.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was formless and empty, and waters and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. The second day God said, "Put an expanse between the waters on the earth and the waters above." And God called the expanse sky. On the third day God said, "Let dry ground appear and separate the waters on the earth." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, plants and trees, the land produced plants and trees bearing fruit according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good." The fourth day God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light on earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the sun to govern the day, and the moon to govern the night. He also made the stars and set them in the expanse of the sky. And God saw that it was good. On the fifth day God said, "Let the waters be filled with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea, and every winged bird according to its kind. And there was evening and there was morning the fifth day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the sixth day. By the seventh day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the seventh day, he rested.
Għaddi kienet l-ispiegazzjoni ta' kif saru l-ħolqien skont ir-rakkont tal-Genesis fil-Bibja. Rakkont illi l-awtur jidher biċ-ċar li qed jikkompara l-Alla ma' bniedem tas-sena ta' dik iż-żminijiet. Forsi bena xi biċċa xogħol tal-ġebel, xi kamra, jew xi biċċa mejda sempliċi. Assommu li kienet jaħdem fuq linja. U għamel mejda. Beda fil-ħodu, għamel dir mejda, lestija fil-għaxija, beda jħares leha, oġbitu, ħafna, kien kontent, u mar jorqod. U jqum lada fil-ħodu u jagħmel siġġu. U propju l-awtur tal-Genesis qed jikkompara dal-bniedem tas-sena ma' Alla. Li hemm differenza bejn wieħed jara x'jaħseb li ġraw l-affarijiet għal fatti kif turina x-xjenza bħalma ħajrina sew. Issa x-xjenzat Brian Cox jispjegalna kif ix-xjenza skopriet li ġara mill-bidu ħanejdu hekk ta' rivoluzzjoni. Ġrat esplużjoni kbira, għaddu 13,000 miljun sena, wara 13,000 miljun sena der il-bniedem fid-dinja. U li propju der dan l-aħħar qisu 100,000 sena. Ġifieri kieku kellek tikkompara f'ġurnata li sar il-ħolqien f'ġurnata. Il-bniedem ġie l-aħħar ftit sekondi.
From the primordial cloud of gas and cosmic dust, gravity forged the stars. Gravity connects star systems together in vast galaxies and steers them on their journey through unbounded space. The relentless flow of time has driven the evolution of the universe and created extraordinary wonders. Some galaxies form so close together that they're locked in a gravitational embrace. a magnificent sight it would be. As it evolves, the universe passes through distinct eras. Vast ages whose beginnings and endings are marked by unique milestones. The births and deaths of its wonders.
We are the product of a grand evolutionary sequence, cosmic evolution, about which we are only occasionally aware.
Gravity is the great creator, the constructor of worlds. But gravity is also the destroyer, because it's relentless. When a star around 15 times the mass of our sun collapses, all the matter in its core is crushed into an infinite void of blackness known as a stellar mass black hole. The immense gravitational pull of these monsters can rip a star apart. They tear matter from its surface and drag it into orbit. This superheated matter spins around the mouth of the black hole, and great jets of radiation fire from the core. Although these jets can be seen across the cosmos, the core itself remains a mystery. Not even light can escape, so their interior is forever hidden from us. Throughout a star's life, there is a constant battle between energy pushing out and gravity pushing in. When it runs out of fuel, the star collapses and then explodes with the brightness of 1 billion suns. As the star is torn apart, it will fire out into space all the elements that it created in its life and death. These are new stars forming from the elements blown out by supernova explosions. New stars being born from the remains of dead ones. And it's from this universal process of death and rebirth that we emerged. Because it was in a nebula just like this, 5 billion years ago, that our sun was formed. Clouds of hydrogen collapse further and further under the force of gravity, and the life cycle of a new star has begun. A star was born that would come to be known as the sun. Around it, a network of planets formed. Among them was the Earth. Debris left over from the formation of the solar system collides with the Earth. Earth began life as a molten hell.
The early continents were still forming. The land was dominated by volcanoes, hostile and lifeless. But deep in the oceans, life had begun. The latest theory is that chemicals spewing from underwater volcanic vents solidified and created the conditions needed for the first cells to form. For some 3 billion years, simple microscopic organisms were the most advanced form of life on the planet. Cyanobacteria and other oxygen-producing microbes began to bloom. These flourished in colonies of plant-like microbes that pumped out enormous volumes of oxygen. And it was this increase in oxygen that was the key to the rise of the animal kingdom.
Organisms started using oxygen to respire, yielding a lot more energy, which allowed the development of more complex life.
Just before complex life appeared, the world was in the grip of the biggest ice age in its entire history. And then suddenly, advanced organisms appeared.
Minn dak li għadna kif rajna, jidher biċ-ċar illi kien hemm żmien twil enormi, tista' tgħid 10,000 miljun sena. Ħafna splużjonijiet u ma sar xejn fid-dinja. Ma kienx hemm sinjali ta' lebda ħajja fid-dinja. Propju l-ħajja bdiet tidher fl-aħħar 3,000 miljun sena. U bħal medna qabel il-bliedem reċenti, ħafna. Dan il-filmat li rajna huwa xogħol ta' nies li jagħmlu ħafna sakrifiċċji, taw ħajjithom, tant ħajjithom illi mietu martirju kbir. Propju li anki sa Charles Darwin ukoll kien attakkat mill-Knisja. U ma kienx komdu jgħix mħabba il-familja tiegħu kienet parti mill-Knisja. Ħanaraw issa Neil deGrasse Tyson jgħidilna fuq dawn ix-xjenzati l-iżgbar li taw ħajjithom għall-umanità.
Stories we tell of people who mattered in the history of science, and you might not have heard about them. And so, Michael Faraday, for example, he's well known to physicists, but he's much less known to the public. Without him, I mean, he basically birthed modern understanding of electromagnetism, and his inventions are how today we still produce electricity. And he was at work in the middle 19th century, and he was a Brit. So that's when I was in London, and we filmed it in a place where he hung out, where his papers are kept, as the Royal Institution. So there's some historical props we're giving to people, not physical props, but giving proper recognition to people who have come before us, who have struggled, who discovered some truth, who had either personal struggles. Faraday had very modest beginnings. Personal struggles or struggles upon arriving at a truth, bringing it to the world around them, only to confront a level of resistive dogma that basically made them martyrs in the history of science, because their ideas were suppressed. In some cases, they lost their lives. We profiled Giordano Bruno, who you don't hear of because right after him came Galileo. Like minutes, practically minutes after him, Galileo's on the scene. And we learn about his conflicts with the church, not Bruno's conflicts with the church. Bruno looked up at night and said, I see all these stars, that's kind of cool. I wonder if those stars are like our sun, just like really far away. If that's the case, maybe they have planets like our sun has. Because Copernicus said, we're not in the center, the sun is. And if we're not in the center, and we're one of multiple planets, that means there could be other places for life. That means there could be life out there in the universe. Well, that was a heretical idea. It would mean Earth was not the object of creation. It would mean God was looking elsewhere as well to put life. This was just completely heretical to the Catholic Church at the time. He refused to recant, and the Inquisition handled that case and handed him over to the Roman authorities and had him burned at the stake. Some centuries later, there would finally be a statue honoring him in I think the Campo di Fiori in Rome. And there's a rather sad statue. He's there, hooded, monk, with the monk garb, and a tribute to his first idea that maybe the universe is bigger than we thought. We tell his story. So,
Jien vera nħossni dispjaċut għal dawn il-persuni li tant ħadmu għall-umanità, ħallew ġid warahom, ħallew lilna komdi ngħixu fil-kumdetajiet li għandna llum, li nivvjaġġaw, mediċina, nikkomunikaw. Enormi il-ġid li ħallew warahom. Dan kollu sar b'sakrifiċċji kbar. Sigħat twal, lieli, sakemm joħorġu għar-riżultat. Issa ħan nitkellmu daqsxejn fuq ir-rivoluzzjoni. U jien naħseb wieħed mill-iktar persuna awtorevoli li nistgħu ngħidu jagħti l-intervent tiegħu huwa Richard Dawkins.
I had said that evolution is a fact in the same sense as it's a fact that the Earth orbits the Sun. And somebody wrote in about that saying, it isn't a theory the Earth moves around the Sun, it's a fact we can observe. Evolution is not. Now I see why he says that, because you sort of think, well, the Earth's moving around the Sun all the time and therefore you can observe it, whereas you can't actually observe evolution because it happened a long time ago, or mostly it did. But really you can't observe that the Earth moves around the Sun. What you observe is the changing seasons, and you infer that the Earth moves around the Sun because you have an interpretation, you have a theory to account for why you get changing seasons. In the same way, you observe that night follows day and day follows night. you don't actually observe that the Earth is spinning. You have a theory that the Earth is spinning, and it accounts for the facts. And it's just the same way with evolution. It's true that we can't actually observe at least the major features of evolution happening. We can observe very, very recent, very tiny bits of evolution happening. It's true that we can't watch dinosaurs evolving. We can't watch fish emerging from the sea and becoming land animals. We have to make inferences. We make inferences on the basis of the evidence available, in just the same way as we make inferences about the Earth's orbit by looking at the seasons and the Earth spinning, by looking at the day-night cycle. I have likened this to a detective coming on the scene of a crime after the crime's been committed. You can't actually watch the crime being committed, but you can see footprints, you can see fingerprints, you can see all sorts of clues that remain in the room where the murder was committed, and you can put forward a hypothesis as to how the murder happened, and then check the hypothesis against the facts. And to a greater or lesser extent, the detective can come to a firm conclusion about who the murderer was. And it's just the same way with evolution, except that the number of clues that we have after the crime, so to speak, are enormously more, enormously richer than those that any detective normally is privileged to see.
Ma setax ta' tweġiba aħjar minn dik Richard Dawkins. Għalmet naraw, x-xjenza għandha ħafna xjenzat illum u diffiċli biex xi ħadd jekk ma jkunx assolutament trid tagħti tarasu u jgħid u jemmen dak li għal eluf ta' snin ilu jemmen il-bniedem. Fil-filmat li ġej ħanaraw kif fl-1959 il-Papa Giovanni kien iddeċieda illi jibda l-Konċilju Vatikan it-Tieni. Konċilju Vatikan it-Tieni li beda fl-1962. Dan ġara għax ix-xjenza ġabet li twemmin ta' Knisja Kattolika wiċċ b'wiċċ mal-verita.
For a question. So what was the big deal facing the church in 1959 when John the 23rd decided to call a council? In a word, modernism. The world was rapidly changing after World War II in terms of science and culture and ideas about what it means to be human. How was the church going to relate to this new world? The church wasn't in decline, in fact it was booming, but John the 23rd expressed a desire to open the windows and let in some fresh air in terms of new ideas and energy. How would the church remain relevant and dynamic in this changing world? So, who was there? Two popes led Vatican II because, well, John the 23rd died in 1963, 1 year in. Paul VI took it to conclusion. They were joined by around 2,000 bishops and leaders of major Catholic orders. These guys made the big decisions. They were assisted by a bunch of theological experts, mainly priests. Alongside all these guys, a number of lay people, including 20 women, were brought in as auditors and advisors. Finally, non-Catholic Christians were invited to observe, including Orthodox and Protestant Christians. Third, the Church should seek to be involved in the modern world through advances such as communications technology. The Church adopted a clearer anti-war stance as a result of the catastrophe of World War II. And finally, Vatican II has also started a whole bunch of arguments, as will no doubt be seen in the comments section below this video. There are those who say we should pursue the spirit of the Council, meaning we should be more open to the world and less concerned with tradition. In contrast, there are those who say we should accept the literal decisions of the Council, but that tradition is important and should be preserved. So, hopefully you now know why the council was called, who was there, what they decided, and how it changed the church.
Biċċar jidher li kien propju li x-xjenza tant avvanzat li qalbet ħafna mentalità tan-nies. Issa daħlet fil-Knisja Kattolika wkoll. U bidew iqomu ħafna argumenti fil-Knisja. X'għandna nagħmlu, x'm'għandniex nagħmlu. Imma lanqas ħadd ipass il-Knisja Kattolika mhux bħal reliġjonijiet oħra. Reliġjonijiet oħra baqgħu ta' rashom. Jgħidu dak li hu ta' twemmin u l-verita. U infatti ix-xjenza li iktar li kibret fejn hemm il-Knisja Kattolika u fejn hemm postijiet illi anke għandhom saħansitra llum Prim Ministri għati membru xi-reġjun. Issa naraw xjenzat fil-biochemistry. ċertu wieħed professur Michael li dan jgħid illi ma jaqbilx ma' teorija ta' Charles Darwin, it-teorija tal-evoluzzjoni.
Now, it turns out, if any of these parts are missing, the trap doesn't work. So, not only is it complex, it's what I called irreducibly complex. You can't take a part away and still have it work. If you took away this hammer, the mice don't get caught. Take away the spring or the holding bar, any of the pieces, it doesn't work. Now, the problem for Darwin's theory is that, number one, the molecular foundation of life is run by machines. The cell is run by actual machines made out of molecules. People find that fantastic, but hey, that's the way it is. There are little machines that act like outboard motors that can propel cells along, and other machines that carry cargo from one part of a cell to another. And those machines, just like pretty much any machine, including the mousetrap, have a number of different parts performing different roles, and they're all needed for the machine to work. Darwin's theory of evolution requires that natural selection favor an organism that has a very small change that helps the organism do something better. So if we're taking that view of Darwinism, we can ask, how could something like this, something like a mousetrap, be put together one tiny step at a time? And it turns out it's surprisingly difficult. If you just had the wooden platform, just the bottom, that doesn't catch mice. If you put on, say, this holding bar, you might say, well, maybe if a mouse is running along, it would trip on the platform and impale itself on the holding bar. But that's kind of just silly. So this can't be made gradually. So that's a big problem for Darwin's theory, because pretty much the foundation of life, these things are all over the place. And furthermore, you can ask yourself, well, how do we recognize intelligence? And it turns out that the way that we recognize intelligence is by what I called a purposeful arrangement of parts. And that's when different parts are put up in relationship to each other, where you can see that they have a purpose. That is, the arrangement has a purpose. An easy example are letters in a word. People put the letters in to form a word, words to make a sentence, and so on. And not only is this arrangement, this can't be put together gradually, but we immediately see that the arrangement of these parts has a purpose. And so we immediately grasp the intelligence that was needed to produce something like this. And again, I can't emphasize enough that Darwin didn't know anything about the foundation of life. He and his contemporaries thought that the cell was a little piece of jello, protoplasm, they'd call it. And it was mysterious, did cool stuff, but they didn't know how, so they pretty much ignored it. But modern science has shown that the cell is a lot like a ultra-sophisticated nanoscale factory, far, far beyond anything that humans could produce. And again, they're just chock full of machinery that is much more sophisticated than this simple little mousetrap. So not only have I become skeptical of Darwin, but you can readily see the design in life. So I've argued that many of these machines were purposefully designed.
Mażubajja. Dara jien ukoll mort nagħti kax beda jgħidha Professur Bieħed. Il-Professur Bieħed qabel xejn. Missu jaf li x-xjenza ma taħdimx kif qed jgħidu. Illi inti għandek twemmin illi id-dinja u l-univers inħoloq f'60. U biex tipprova li dak vera, issib bħajdu hekk xara fl-ġina. Jew argument wieħed fejn qed jgħid il-mekkaniżmu bażiku li għamil iċ-ċanari ma jinbidilx. F'sena ma jinbidilx. Met sena ma jinbidilx. F'1000 sena ma jinbidilx. Forsi f'1,000,000 sena ma jinbidilx. Ma l-evoluzzjoni li xjenzati oħra qed jitkellmu fuqha eluf ta' miljuni ta' snin. U f'ċertu każi taħdem differenti l-evoluzzjoni.
Like buried treasure, they lie hidden from sight. Echoes of an ancient past, they whisper secrets and tell tales once lost to time. Fossils are remnants or impressions of ancient organisms that are naturally preserved in stone. While there are hundreds of fossil types, they are often grouped into two major categories: body fossils, which are the preserved remains of plants and animals, and trace fossils, which are records of an animal's behavior, such as footprints. Together, they form the fossil record, a primary account that tells the story of life on Earth through stone. Fossilization, or the process of preserving organisms in stone, can occur in countless ways. These methods are largely grouped depending on whether the organisms are altered during the fossilization process. Fossilization that does not alter a specimen can help to preserve its original form and texture. Among many methods, this group includes organisms that have been frozen, preserved in tar pits, and mummified. One special case involves trapping organisms, oftentimes insects, in amber. This process begins when an organism is covered in tree sap. The sap, or resin, forms a protective seal around the entrapped organism. Over time, the soft resin hardens and turns into amber, with the organism suspended within. This process creates a biologically inert tomb for the organism, allowing its soft tissues to be remarkably preserved. Other fossilization methods change the specimen as it is being preserved. For instance, carbonization transforms soft tissues into thin black films of carbon. In fact, countless layers of carbonized plant material create a well-known fossil fuel, coal. But one of the most common types of fossilization that changes a specimen is called permineralization. Permineralization begins when minerals from water or the ground enter the pores of dead plant or animal material. Over time, the minerals attach themselves, clinging onto cellular walls and building a crystalline network in the empty cavities. This mineralization hardens the bone and turns it into stone, thereby preserving its original structure in fossil form. When conditions are right, fossilization can preserve crucial information about an organism. Permineralized wood often contains enough information to identify its tree genus and sometimes its species. Insects encased in amber have been so well preserved that their genetic material was extracted and partially sequenced. And footprints left behind by ancient hominins help paint a picture of what life was like for early human ancestors millions of years ago. With every fossil uncovered, the planet's ancient past becomes clearer, helping shape our understanding of our world today.
Hemmhekk rajna dak il-dokumentarju xemm wara l-istudju tal-fossili li jidher biċ-ċar illi jinvolvi ħafna tekniki, tipi ta' studji differenti u li żgur ix-xjenza hemmhekk qed f'posta kontra għalli qal ta' qabel il-professur Beħe. Għanna naraw issa idea ta' xjenzat iehor. ċertu wieħed, Professor Collins.
Science is about trying to get rigorous answers to questions about how nature works. And it's a very important process that's actually quite reliable if carried out correctly with generation of hypotheses and testing of those by accumulation of data, and then drawing conclusions that are continually revisited to be sure they're right. So if you want to answer questions about how nature works, how biology works, for instance, science is the way to get there. Scientists believe in that, and they are very troubled by a suggestion that other kinds of approaches can be taken to derive truth about nature. And some, I think, have seen faith as therefore a threat to the scientific method and therefore to be resisted. But faith in its proper perspective is really asking a different set of questions, and that's why I don't think there needs to be a conflict here. The kinds of questions that faith can help one address are more in the philosophical realm. Why are we all here? Why is there something instead of nothing? Is there a God? Isn't it clear that those aren't scientific questions and that science doesn't have much to say about them? But you either have to say, well, those are inappropriate questions and we can't discuss them, or you have to say we need something besides science to pursue some of the things that humans are curious about. For me, that makes perfect sense. But I think for many scientists, particularly for those who have seen the shrill pronouncements from extreme views that threaten what they're doing scientifically and feel therefore that they can't really include those thoughts into their own worldview, faith can be seen as an enemy. And similarly, on the other side, some of my scientific colleagues who are of an atheist persuasion are sometimes using science as a club over the head of believers, basically suggesting that anything that can't be reduced to a scientific question isn't important, and it just represents a superstition and should be gotten rid of. Part of the problem is, I think the extremists have occupied the stage. Those voices are the ones we hear. I think most people are actually kind of comfortable with the idea that science is a reliable way to learn about nature, but it's not the whole story. And there's a place also for religion, for faith, for theology, for philosophy. But that harmony perspective doesn't get as much attention. Nobody's as interested in harmony as they are in conflict, I'm afraid. My study of genetics certainly tells me incontrovertibly that Darwin was right about the nature of how living things have arrived on the scene by descent from a common ancestor under the influence of natural selection over very long periods of time. Darwin was amazingly insightful given how limited the molecular information he had was. Essentially, it didn't exist. Now with the digital code of DNA, we have the best possible proof of Darwin's theory that he could have imagined. So that certainly tells me something about the nature of living things. But it actually adds to my sense that this is an answer to a how question, and it leaves the why question still hanging in the air. Other aspects of our universe, I think also, for me, as for Einstein, raise questions about the possibility of an intelligence behind all of this. Why is it, for instance, that the constants that determine the behavior of matter and energy, like the gravitational constant, for instance, have precisely the value that they have to in order for there to be any complexity at all in the universe? That is fairly breathtaking in its lack of probability of ever having happened, and it does make you think that a mind might have been involved in setting the stage. At the same time, that does not imply necessarily that that mind is controlling the specific manipulations of things that are going on in the natural world. In fact, I would very much resist that idea. I think the laws of nature potentially could be the product of a mind. I think that's a defensible perspective. But once those laws are in place, then I think nature goes on, and science has the chance to be able to perceive how that works and what its consequences are.
Dak kien il-professur Collins. Fejn spjegalna għaliex xjenzati huma attiv u oħrajn jgħidu li x-xjenza tista' titħallat ma' twemmin. Ħalli ngħiduha kif inhi. Illum l-istudji tal-Bibja kollu daħlu xjentifikament. Ġifieri minn konċil il-Vatikan it-tieni law. Ħafna mis-studjużi ta' Knisja huma studjużi xjentifiki. Imma fuq it-teoloġija, fuq l-istorja, fuq il-ġeografija, u dak kollu li għandu x'jaqsam max-xjenza. Ix-xjenza tal-letteratura. Hemmhekk naqbel magħha li x-xjenza tidħol fit-twemmin. Imma f'dak li huwa twemmin biss, ma nafx kemm tista' tidħol magħha x-xjenza. Jiena nara li x-xjenza għadha għandha l-metodi tagħha u jrid ikun hemm l-analiżi, l-ipotezi biex ir-riżultat. Issa dak li twemmin x'analiżi jista' jkun hemm. Tista' tinanalizza lill-Alla.
The age of modern science, which is the age where you put up a hypothesis and you test it and you wait to see if other people verify it or falsify it, that beginning around 1600 with Galileo and Francis Bacon. Before then, people just thought stuff up and thought it might be true and sort of lived with it. So the transition from a flat Earth to a round Earth, and Earth in the middle of the known universe, and the sun in the middle of the known universe, all that happened before this era. So you are not in a position to invoke that as evidence for how science is now run.
So like when you say in the book that scientists thought that the sun was a lump of burning coal, for instance. That was
no, that's a different thing. That's a different thing. So now watch. Now, scientists can think all kinds of stuff, most of which will be wrong. Even in the published journals, most of what's in the journals will eventually be shown to be wrong. Okay? That's the frontier of research. In the frontier, the bleeding, bloody edge of the frontier of research, we're duking it out at conferences. You say something, I say, I don't believe you, and I got better data, or different data, and I got my data from somewhere else, and you were delusional. This goes on the frontier. But you know what happens? I get a result, you're my competitor, and you try to show that I'm wrong, and you get a result that agrees with my result. Ooh, and then someone from another country does, and they kind of agree. There'll always be outliers, but what happens is you get this emergent truth, an emergent consensus, not of opinion, but of observation and experiment. And when that emerges, you have in your possession a new objective truth that will be true whether or not you believe in it. And if you think you can just cherry pick outliers from the body of evidence that is establishing a truth, and you think you've got a case upon which to build legislation. You don't. You are building a house of cards, which after a certain level will just collapse under its own weight, and it is the most precarious foundation on which to build an informed democracy.
Neil deGrasse Tyson m'għandu bżonn ebda introduzzjoni fid-dinja tax-xjenza. Rajnieh fis-series ta' Cosmos li l-ewwel wieħed kien għamlu Carl Sagan. Tajb nkunu nafu li Tyson kien l-istudent ta' Carl Sagan ukoll. U kif rajna? Rajna li spjegazzjoni li tagħna ċara fuq kif taħdem ix-xjenza li mhux dejjem tkun favorevoli, mhux dejjem tagħti riżultat tajb, tagħti riżultati negattivi. Ma mbagħad l-entitajiet u laboratorji tax-xjenza jikkontattjaw xulxin biex imbagħad toħroġ il-verità. Ħa naraw issa l-Richard Dawkins nerġgħu.
So how do we justify, as it were, faith that science will give us the truth? Is that the...
Please. How do you justify scientific method?
Yes.
What he said.
It works. It works. Planes fly, cars drive, computers compute.
It's an inductive argument.
If you base medicine on science, you cure people. If you base the design of planes on science, they fly. If you base the design of rockets on science, they reach the moon. It works. Bitches.
Bitches. U mhux vera, jew. Mela qed insaqsu mistoqsija. Li din mistoqsija trid tkun bil-fors favur dak li nemmnu aħna. Inutli insaqsu dan mistoqsijiet, jekk int ħadd temmen f'xi ħaġa, tersax lejn ix-xjenza, tibqa' emmen fli qed temmen. Issa inti kurjuż. Temmen, però tkompli ssaqsi. Pamma ħafna jagħmlu, ġiri jkunu jagħmlu. Jkomplu jsaqsu, jispiċċaw jażlu x-xjenza, għax ix-xjenza tihom iktar fatti u provi. Ħa naraw issa lil-laqgħa li kienu għamlu fl-Awstralja, Richard Dawkins u Lawrence Krauss, fejn tkellmu dettaljat fuq x'inhi x-xjenza.
There, I think probably science, depending exactly on how you define spirituality, science probably does have quite a lot to offer. I'm looking forward to going to visit the observatory tonight and seeing what I hope will be a clear view of the Milky Way, which in the southern hemisphere is a lot more exciting than it is in the northern hemisphere. So I'm looking forward to that, and that will be, I confidently expect, something like a spiritual experience.
Well, I think for many people it is. Whenever I give a lecture, I show pictures from, let's say, from the Hubble Space Telescope, a picture of a cluster of galaxies. I mean, the poetry of it, the poetry, well, we've both talked about the poetry of science, but the spiritual inspiration you get from looking at a picture of a cluster of galaxies located 5 billion light years away from us, where every dot in that picture is a galaxy. The light from those stars left those stars before our sun and earth formed, which means that now many of the stars in that picture don't exist anymore. And if there were civilizations around those stars, each of those galaxies contains 100 billion stars. Any civilization that existed around those stars no longer may exist. It just opens your mind to wonder. And so I actually feel very strongly that while science per se may not provide the direct consolation, it can and it should provide a spiritual, not only wonder, but it should provide a consolation. Look, when we talked about this last night, we tell our kids fairy tales to console them. We tell them to make their life fun. We talk about Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, but then we decide that, you know what, it's better for them to know how the world really works. And it may be a little less consoling, but in fact, knowing that they're in control of their lives actually is empowering. And many of us, if you're a good parent, you want to teach your kids how to become empowered. And yet, but religion, and in religion, they're often talked about the flock, the children. It effectively treats you like a child. It says it's better for you to believe a fable than reality. And often when I end a lecture on cosmology, I point out that the two things modern cosmology has taught us is that first, you're much more insignificant than you ever thought, and two, that the future is miserable. But that should make you feel good, not bad, because it further enhances exactly what you were talking about. We are so lucky to be alive today and endowed with a consciousness where we, for whatever fortuitous reasons, on a random star in a random galaxy in the middle of nowhere, we are able to evolve a consciousness, live on a relatively quiescent planet. And so I actually think science can provide a real consolation by saying, look, once you accept reality, it's liberating. Just like a child is liberated when they become an adult. And in fact, I want to ask you, the reason I was getting around to here is I know we've talked about your foundation and whether science can provide that consolation. And maybe you could relate the story.
Well, I mean, my foundation is called the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Reason and Science. And my primary motivation is that a reasoning approach to science is enthralling. It's such a privilege to be alive in the 21st century and to look out at the stars and reflect on exactly the things you've just been saying, Lawrence. To look down a microscope, to look down an electron microscope, to look into a single cell and see the prodigious, stupefying complexity of a single cell, and then realize that there are trillions of those cells in your body, all conspiring together to produce a working machine which can walk and run and eat and have sex and think, reflect, understand why we exist, understand where we came from, understand where the universe came from, understand the magnificent fact that it could all have come from nothing and built up from nothing into galaxies, into stars, into chemistry, into primordial life, into genes, into primitive bacteria, protozoa, and then right up the evolutionary progression to become, in Julian Huxley's words, conscious of itself. What a privilege it is for each one of us to have in our heads an organ which is capable of comprehending that, of constructing a model of the universe inside our heads. It is sad that that model will die when our brain dies, but my goodness, what a privilege it is before we do die to have been able to construct that model in our heads and to understand why we were ever born in the first place.
Perhaps the most exciting part, I'm sure for both you and I hope for those of you who are students in the audience, is that we don't know all the answers. And that's the other fundamental difference between science and, I would say, religion, if we want, is that religion assumes the answers and asks the questions. And the great thing about science is not knowing. That's what makes it exciting, is that there are mysteries remaining to be discovered. We don't understand the mystery of consciousness. We can talk about it, but we have no idea how it arises. That amazing that you have electrical impulses in your brain, which clearly, by the way, are very different than computers. Vastly different than computers, because you can argue from a physics perspective that if you built a digital computer that had the storage capability of the human brain and the processing power, it would require 10 terawatts. 10 terawatts, that's 10 times 10 to the 12th watts. The human brain uses about 10 watts. So somehow we are 10 million times more efficient than digital computers. We don't understand that. That's amazing. But you know, I wanted to actually hit the point that you didn't get to, but which I found remarkable. When you tried to make your foundation for reason and science a tax-deductible foundation, a charitable foundation, you had a problem.
Well, I wanted to get it tax-deductible, and so I applied both in Britain and in America. The primary problem was in Britain, where in order to, you have to prove it benefits humanity. If you're a church, you don't have to prove anything. That goes through goes through on the nod. But I had this foundation for reason and science, and I got a letter from the British Charity Commission which said, kindly explain how scientific education benefits humanity.
I thought we had to tell that story in public. I thought we had to hear that. Before we're getting close to the end, there are a few things I thought we might cover. One was, in fact, a big issue in the United States, and to some extent in England, and I'm not, it's amazing to visit a country where the Prime Minister is an atheist. It's remarkable. In the United States, you may not be aware, that won't happen. And in fact,
I think it has happened.
Yeah, well, it probably has happened, exactly. But it would be easier to be a Muslim, and of course many people in the United States think we have a Muslim president at this point. But there was a recent study by psychologists in the United States that was terrifying, that said, it was a study of college students and adults, and the most distrusted group was atheists. The only group that they were on par with was rapists. And it's remarkable, because it's, both you and I, you perhaps more than me, are claimed to be strident, maybe. But what I find is that if you just ask the question, is it possible that there's no God, you suddenly become terrifying. And you were obviously terrifying, I felt last night, to the Cardinal, who felt attacked and was on the defensive. And it seems to me, if you ask questions and people are defensive, there must be a reason.
We hear stories, don't we, of children going to Sunday school and being thrown out for having the temerity to ask questions. I mean, not to criticize, but just to ask, how dare you ask a question? And I think that does argue a certain defensiveness.
It seems to me that, we encourage. The funny thing is we encourage our children, those of us who try to be good parents or teachers, to ask questions. That's how you learn. And so we encourage people to ask questions, unless the questions are about religion, and then they're viewed as being impudent or rude or inappropriate. And it seems to me that one of the things that's so valuable about what you've done, and we've moderated our views over the years as we've had discussions, is if you simply treat religion like any other aspect of human activity, which means it should be subject to questioning and ridicule, like politicians and politics and physics and sex and everything else, then religion, if you just ask that religion be put on that same framework, it raises a consciousness that people are just somehow don't think it should be. It should be here and never subject to any of those things.
Iktar ma nisma' fuq ix-xjenza, iktar napprezza x'ġid għamlet għall-umanità. Din ix-xjenza. Disgrazzjatament huwa daqsxejn diżapponti illi ċertu xjenzati jaħdmu iktar fuq l-armi, fuq id-distruzzjoni tal-bniedem, milli fuq għal-ġid tal-bniedem. Ir-raġuni li finanzjarjament imorru ħafna aħjar minn dawk li jaħdmu għal-ġid tal-umanità. Għaldaqstant għandna napprezzaw dawk ix-xjenzati li jaħdmu għal-ġid tal-umanità, u dawn huma ħafna. Jiena biżżejjed waħda mill-ħobbis li għandi jiena huwa l-astronomija. Bit-teleskop li għandi modern li jaħdem bil-GPS huwa vera komdu immens li jiena sempliċement irrid ndawwar lejn stilla u ma nagħmaq inħabber rasi xejn. Jitfani għal dik id-direzzjoni tagħha. Stiller li sa ftit ta' żmien ilu, sa 200 sen ilu, konna narawhom bħala oġġett dawal fis-sema u ma nafux x'inhuma. Issa ħanaraw l-aħħar wieħed filmat u dana ħajspjegalna eżatti x'inhuma l-metodi tax-xjenza. Dana l-Università ta' Kalifornja, dan il-professuri, studenti fiha, riċerka fuq bremba li sabuha far.
A couple years ago, a group of citizen scientists from the Western Cave Conservancy discovered a large, odd-looking spider in a cave in southern Oregon. They sent it to scientists in California. Recently, those scientists declared that spider a new species, Troglodyte, and a member of a new family of spiders. Sounds straightforward, right?
Wrong. Science definitely is not a linear step-by-step fashion. And science is unpredictable. It's dynamic. And I don't think it ever concludes. It just keeps going.
To communicate the real process of science, Judy and her colleagues developed this science flowchart to better explain how science works.
You may start in one area and you find the need to communicate with the community of scientists that you work with who might have additional or other ideas, and all of that helps to shape what science is and how we go about the process of science.
So let's take a look at the Troglodyte discovery flowchart. It's less like a linear process and more like a pinball machine. Let's follow the path using the spider that the citizen scientists found as the pinball. They sent it to scientist Tracy Audizio, who is very curious about what lives in caves. She examined it for about 2 hours one night, trying to identify it by making observations and conferring with a colleague. They were stumped. The two researchers worked with the Academy's Charles Griswold and brought the specimen to him. He began his own observations.
I looked at it through the vial, not under a microscope, and I thought, oh, this is a brown recluse. It's about the same size, but when I looked at it closely, all the brown recluse characters, that is, various details of its anatomy, were wrong. The eyes were placed in the wrong arrangement. The jaws were wrong. The spinning organs were wrong. Everything about it was wrong.
Science often comes down to trial and error. The scientists shared ideas, and then...
Well, first we went to the books, and it didn't fit anything. After that, we carefully compared the new spider to descriptions of all spider families known in the world today, and we also consulted books on fossil spiders.
Along the way, the researchers made hypotheses about what this spider was and what it wasn't. Charles looked at the Academy's collections and others.
The more we looked at it, the more we realized that the details were wrong for every known family, living or extinct.
What do you do in science when you're stumped? Reach out to the scientific community.
You consult your colleagues who are knowledgeable, who know some things better than you do, and present the case for your conclusions, the evidence, and ask, what do you think of this? The word came back that, no, we've never seen this before.
They made a hypothesis.
We believe it's a new family related to the goblin spiders. But to suggest a new family is a very big deal. It doesn't happen very often, and the last time this happened in North America was more than 100 years ago.
Time for more input from the scientific community.
So we wrote the publication. They sent the paper and its conclusions to anonymous scientists, and they also agreed that we'd done a good job.
So let's celebrate. Wait, remember what Judy said?
And I don't think it ever concludes. It just keeps going, keeps going, keeps going.
And that's true with Troglodyte.
In the arachnology lab at California Academy of Sciences, we're very interested in this major group of spiders. And we have a big team of scientists, students, postdoctoral researchers, who want to understand the evolution of goblin spiders.
So they're asking more questions, making more hypotheses and observations, doing more testing on Troglodyte.
It has a surprising respiratory system, the way it breathes, the remarkable claws, which caused us to give it its name, are the subject of an anatomical study. Facundo Labarca actually dissected the feet of Troglodytes and looked at the attachment of tendons. My PhD student is leading an effort to understand the phylogeny of the haplogyn spiders, especially the goblin spiders, through the use of molecular data.
And Troglodytes in general? Those spiders live happily on in that cave, and probably other nearby caves.
The caves are protected.
So let's look at that process again, sped up this time. Pinball machine, right? And this process is true not just for scientists, but the rest of us too.
We all do science every day. We all make observations, we ask questions, we communicate with people we know about our ideas, we come back to those original ideas. So I like to think that it demystifies science a bit. Everybody can do science.
Għawek wasalna fit-tmim ta' dan il-podcast. Nispera li jissudisfajniekom tweġibiet minn dawn xjenzati magħrufin ma' kulħadd. Issa biex nagħlqu ħajjitkellmu żewġ persuni li huma membri fil-kumitat tal-għaqda SICEC li wkoll nippartieni minnu. Lobba se jitkellem Tim Sammiet li hu s-segretarju u mbagħad jitkellem il-President Vanni Pule. Ħanna naraw x'qal dawn fuq ix-xjenza u fuq is-soċjetà sabiħa. Illum għandna magħna lil Timi u ħanibdew mal-ewwel bil-mistoqsijiet. Ħanibda bil-insaqsik Timi. X'kien li oġbu tantu għal-qalbek dal-grupp SICEC?
L-interess fil-affarijiet li ma tantx huma spjegabbli bix-xjenza ilu fija minn meta kont għadni teenager. Jiena dak iż-żminijiet niftakar kienu qed joħorġu kodba bħal von Däniken u nies oħra li għalija billi ma kontx nifhem biżżejjed fis-suġġett kienu jiskantawni daw il-claims li kienu jagħmlu u kont nemminhom dak iż-żminijiet. Però mbagħad meta bdejt nikber u bdejt ngħid dawn l-affarijiet irid kien hemm spjegazzjoni għalihom, bdejt insir xettiċu ħafna. Allura mbagħad bdejt nidħol fis-suġġett u nara x'kienet l-ispjegazzjoni ta' kull claim li kulħadd jagħmel. Dawn paranormal claims over the years sibt li jekk inti tidħol daqsxejn fihom tirrealizza li m'hemm lebda evidenza li huma veritieri. L-uniku ħaġa li sibt li jiena hija reliable hija x-xjenza. Meta xi ħadd jagħmel esperiment, xi ħadd iehor u jagħmel ċertu claims, xi ħadd ieħor jirrepeti l-esperiment u jikkonferma l-esperiment tal-ewwel xjentist. Fil-paranormal ma jiġrix hekk. Kulħadd jagħmel il-claims, kulħadd m'hemm l-ebda provi li huma aċċettati xjentifikament u allura sirt xettiku ħafna.
Naqbel miegħek 100%. Huwa dan l-iskop li aħna kollha qegħdin tal-grupp għal dan li qed inti. Issa minn dawn għadna kif smajna, dawn l-esperti li tista' tgħid li huma l-aqwa fid-dinja tax-xjenza tal-lum. X'taħseb fuq dak li qalu?
Jiena ovvjament naqbel ma' kollox li jgħidu dawn nies, għax dan huma n-nies li qegħdin jagħmlu x-xogħol li kieku jiena kelli biżżejjed esperjenza nagħmlu jiena. Daw jidħlu fil-claims li jagħmlu dawn in-nies li jikklejmjaw jaraw ċertu paranormal. Jidħlu fis-suġġett, jistudjaw u juru provi li ma jistax ikun li hemm dawn il-paranormali events, dawn l-events paranormali, għax m'hemm lebda evidenza li huma veritieri. Kieku eżempju wieħed li jiġi aċċettat mix-xjenza, kieku nibda nemmen. Imma laqqas qatt ma kien hawn eżempju wieħed fejn ix-xjenza aċċettat li huwa veru.
Imma bħalma smajna kien hemm xjenzat. Lawrence Krauss li qal aħna ma nafux kollox. Fuq din li qal aħna ma nafux kollox, x'tikkummenta?
Dik hija parti mix-xjenza. Anzi, kważi iktar ma niskopru, iktar nirrealizzaw li hemm iżjed x'tiskopri. Ma dik hija parti mix-xjenza. U x-xjenza li fiha sabiħ hija li meta niskopru xi ħaġa li hija differenti milli konna naħsbu l-bieraħ, ix-xjenza tinbidel. Ix-xjenza hija xi ħaġa li timxi ma' żminijiet. Jekk niskopru xi ħaġa ġdida, mela dik hija x-xjenza preżenti. Eżempju tal-li kont qed ngħid qabel. Ġifieri kif ix-xjenza tinbidel biż-żminijiet. Kien hemm żmien meta kulħadd kien jaħseb li aħna qegħdin fiċ-ċentru tal-univers u kollox idur magħna. Però meta in-nies bdew jiskopru u jaraw ċertu observations li mhumiex konsistenti ma' li qed jaraw, kien hemm ċertu individwi li rrealizzaw li aħna maħniex fiċ-ċentru tal-univers, infatti aħna nduru ma' xemx. Ix-xjenza bidlet l-opinjoni tagħha u taċċetta dawk l-observations. Ix-xjenza tinbidel minn żmien għal żmien.
U dejja inkredibbli li għadha kif qed għax propju titqis il-bniedem ilu jeżisti. Nistgħu ngħidu ċ-ċivilizzat beda jiċċivilizza ruħu bil-mod l-aħħar 30,000 sena. U propju dan l-aħħar 500 sena illi sarja fid-dinja tonda u ddur ma' xemx. U għall-aħħar stejt mod ieħor illi d-dinja ċatta, tgħid bil-forsi d-dinja ċatta, għax kont issib ruħek maħruq ġewx pjazza. Ġifieri aħna probabbli konna nispiċċaw. Nikkonkludu daqsxejn timim. Xi tgħid għall-futur?
Ismani, tas-soċjetà?
Tas-soċjetà.
Le, jiena naħseb issa għandna sejrin xi 25 sena u naħseb li għandna futur sabiħ għax l-iskop tagħna huwa ovvjament li nippruvaw nikkonvinċu nies li jaħsbu li l-paranormali hija xi ħaġa reali, nippruvaw nurruhom li mhijiex reali, ix-xjenza hija reali.
Grazzi.
Okay, thank you, Manuel.
Qudiemi hawn persuna li m'għandu ebda bżonn ta' introduzzjoni, Vanni Pula, huwa nista' tgħid ir-ras tal-grupp SICEC, il-President tal-grupp SICEC. X'ġalek li tifforma dan il-grupp?
Primarjament hija l-fascinu li għandi dak li huwa stram, dak li huwa eċċentriku, dak li huwa straordinarju. Fil-fatt, fil-bidu ta' snin 70 bdejt ninvolvi ruħi f'qdiet ta' parapsikoloġija, paranormal, però iktar ma għadda żmien iktar bdejt ninduna li f'dawn l-affarijiet iktar hemm kliem milli fatti, iktar hemm teoriji milli hemm kif naqbad evidenza. U li ġara huwa intqajt ma' persuna li kien involut ħafna fix-xettiċiżmu ċertu Kow Stolper mill-Olanda, mill-Netherlands, li kien ġie Malta, u kien ġabni in kuntatt ma' qdiet internazzjonali tal-xettiċi, fosthom il-Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal tal-Amerika u gruppi mill-Ingilterra, gruppi mill-Olanda, bdejt ikkorrispondi magħhom u mbagħad kellna okkażjoni ta' dibattitu fuq it-television fuq ix-xettiċiżmu, fuq il-paranormali kemm fuq il-xettiċiżmu, kien hemm David Pager li huwa wkoll xettiku bħali fuq il-panel. Wara spiċċa l-programm, David laqqani ma' timi u ħriġna ħarġu iktar huma membri l-idea li nagħmlu din l-għaqda. Dan kien xi 25 sena ilu. Ġifieri dak kien il-bidu tal-għaqda magħrufa bħala SICEC.
Għal-dar ma konx ma'kom fil-bidu ftit xi 22 sena li ma'kom. Vanni, Palma rajna sensiela ta' persuni awtorevoli ħafna fix-xjenza jitkellmu hawnhekk. X'taħseb dwar dan li qalu?
Jiena naqbel jiena m'iniex xjenzjat, jiena minn ħafna fil-metodu xjentifiku, jiġifieri jgħidu li l-verità hija relattiva, jiena ma ngħidx li hija relattiva l-verità. L-verità hemm verità oġġettiva, naturalment hemm ċerti affarijiet li maħniex ċerti fuqhom, pereżempju ċerti dibattiti li maħniex ċerti fuqhom, però hemm ċerti fatti li nistgħu ngħidu nistgħu nħarsu lejhom mod oġġettiv. U għaliex hemm l-evidenza. L-evidenza hija importanti. L-evidenza prinċipalment hija tas-sensi tagħna, ġifieri aħna nagħmel sensi, naraw, nistgħu naraw, nxommu, nistgħu nduqu, ġifieri l-affarijiet ta' madwarna, ovvjament is-sensi ma jwaslux il-bogħod ħafna, allura hemm metodi oħrajn bħal mikroskopju, bħal teleskopju li jiġeluna naraw iktar il-bogħod u nsibu evidenza iktar il-bogħod. Mbagħad hemm metodu t-tielet wieħed li huwa il-metodu ta' kif naqbad ngħid l-esperiment tal-matematika, tat-teorija li inti tipprova permezz ta' formuli matematiċi u billi tagħmel esperimenti u tara jirnexxu tagħmel tbassir predizzjonijiet tara daw jirnexxu. Jiġifieri dik hija l-verità. Hemm ċerti affarijiet li qatt irridu nskopruhom hemm dubju. Fix-xjenza naturalment ma tistax tgħid daqshekk, ma tistax tgħid naf ċert, u dik hija sabiħ li jista' jiġi xjenzjat ieħor li jiskopri affarijiet ġodda, però li noqogħdu għax ma nafux ma jkollniex dejta biżżejjed nispekulaw li hemm xi ħaġa paranormali jew sopranaturali hija għalija falsità.
Vanna, bħalma rajna f'dawn is-sensiela ta' filmati osra, kien hemm xjenzat minnhom, ċertu wieħed professjonali, li dana qed jgħid illi għax iċ-ċellola hemm mekkaniżmu li ma jistax jinbidel, imur kontra it-teorija tal-evoluzzjoni. U jgħid ma qbilx ma ċasdan, anzi isu kemm jipprova xi jreddu kollha aħna ċasdan. Ma dan xjenzat ukoll. Għaliex?
Ħanejdlek.
Jiena personali ma nħossix onestati, ma kienx onestati.
Mhux bil-forsi kwestjoni ta' onestà, kultant nkunu naraw ċertu tunnel. Jiena nsemmilek nies kbar pereżempju bħal Sir Isaac Newton, waħed mill-aqwa xjenzjati li kellha, imma kien marbut ħafna mal-iskrittura, mal-Bibbja, mal-protestantizmu dak iż-żmien, u minkejja li għamel skoperti li għadhom validi sal-lum, kellu ċertu teoriji mbagħad li illum mhux tal-li huma passeta li naraw merijiet, pereżempju kien jemmen fl-alkemija, kien jemmen li l-Papa huwa parti l-moviment tas-satanizmu għax kien imur kontra l-protestantizmu. Jiġifieri mhux bil-fars kulħadd kull ma jaħseb kulħadd huwa perfett. Naturalment, illum it-teorija tal-evoluzzjoni hija mhix teorija fis-sens teorija li forsi nafu li ħafna mix-xjenzi, il-bioloġija, il-neurosciences pereżempju, ħafna minnhom kważi kollha jikkonfermaw dak li skopra Darwin. Ġifieri, naturalment ikun hemm ċerti affarijiet li ma jaqblux, ċerti skoperti ġodda, però kollox, kull ma naraw illum, ġifieri anke il-mediċina pereżempju, kollox huwa bbażat anke sempliċement l-immunology, pereżempju, l-istudju tal-batterja, l-istudju tal-viruses, kollha jikkonfermaw dak li skopra Darwin fil-evoluzzjoni.
Naqbel mek 100% iżda ħadd ma jista' xi ħadd joħodha kontra teorija tal-evoluzzjoni meta bħalmet inti perfett. Kull studju qed imur għal l-evoluzzjoni, anki smajt milux skopru fejqan fis-sensla tad-dar, għax hemm studju fuq is-sensla ta' ħuta. Jiġdek biċ-ċar, ġifieri hemm similarità bejn is-sensla tagħna u s-sensla ta' ħuta. Van, nagħlqu daqsxejn din l-intervista. X'għandek futur f'moħħok fuq dan il-grupp?
Jiena ngħidlek il-verità, inħossni diżappuntat ħafna li ma minniex impatt daqskemm xtaqna. Mhux tordana, aħna pruvajna, però li hemm huwa li l-biċċa kbira tal-poplu jippreferi li jemmen ħafna drabi u ma jidħolx fil-fond biżżejjed. Imma almenu ikonna dawk kultant l-interventi fil-gazzetti, fuq il-televizjoni u nisperaw li jibda li għattamel inti forsi namlu xi ħaġa oħra aktar il-qudiem li niftħu iktar fil-beraħ dawn l-idea tagħna li ovvjament maħniex qed nippritkaw xi dom magħna, maħniex nippritkaw ċiniċiżmu, imma xettiċiżmu, ġifieri metodu kif inti tasal il-verità. Il-verità hija importanti, kultant il-verità mhix sabiħa daqs dak li wishful thinking, daqs dak li hija l-fantasija, però li tkun kapaċi tiddistingwi bejn ir-realtà u l-fantasija huwa xi ħaġa importanti għal progress tal-umanità.
Nirringrazzjak Vanni u żgur li dan kien l-ewwel xogħol u ħankomplu xogħol li jiet oħra.
Grazzi li.
M'għandhomux. Dak kienu l-ħsibijiet ta' Timiżammiet flimkien ma' President Vanni Poler. Miegħi ukoll Emmanuel Psaila. Nirringrazzjakom tal-li ħadtu paċenzja tara dan il-podcast. Grazzi ħafna.
Is it really over? The echoes just seem to get longer. How did we get here? There was so much love in us, and all I have left is my faith that I can change. I can't watch this burn, I can't watch this burn to the ground. You'd have thought we'd learned, you'd have thought we'd learned by now. I can hear the whole world singing together. I can hear the whole world say it's now or never. 'Cause it's not too late if we change our ways and connect the dots to our problems. picking up the pieces. I listen out for beating hearts. Now it's time for healing. The sun will rise, but this time it's so bright. And all I have left is my faith that we could change. 'Cause I can't watch us lose, I can't watch us lose what we found. You'd have thought we'd learned, you'd have thought we'd learned by now. I can hear the whole world singing together. I can hear the whole world say it's now or never. 'Cause it's not too late if we change our ways and connect the dots to our problems. I can hear the whole world say we're in this together, we're in this together. Oh, I can hear the whole world singing together. I can hear the whole world say it's now or